Every human experiences challenge. It's a fundamental part of life, but how we interpret and respond to that challenge shapes everything from our behavior to our biology. The simple act of telling yourself, "My brain and body are designed to adapt, I can handle challenge," isn't a placebo or empty affirmation. It's a scientific truth grounded in the core of how the nervous system operates. At the heart of this is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience. This capacity doesn't disappear after childhood. In fact, under the right conditions, adults can reshape their neural circuits in meaningful, lasting ways. And one of the most powerful triggers for plasticity is challenge, particularly when it's paired with a belief that you can move through it. When we encounter something difficult, the brain registers it through multiple systems. The amygdala detects threat and increases arousal. The hypothalamus signals the release of cortisol and adrenaline to mobilize the body. At the same time, areas like the prefrontal cortex evaluate the situation, consider possible responses, and regulate emotion. The balance between these systems determines whether we become overwhelmed or rise to meet the demand. Here's where self-talk matters. When you consciously tell yourself that your brain and body are capable of adapting to stress, you engage the prefrontal cortex to reframe the situation. This act of cognitive reappraisal changes how the stress response unfolds. Instead of a full-on sympathetic nervous system, spike, fight, or flight, the body can shift into what's called challenge response mode. In this state, your heart rate may rise, but blood vessels remain open, focus sharpens, and the experience is interpreted as energizing rather than threatening. Think of it like this. Your body is built to mobilize resources in response to demand. This is not a flaw, it's a feature. You're supposed to feel alert, activated, even uncomfortable at times. That physiological discomfort is not a signal to retreat. It's a sign that your body is trying to rise to the occasion. And when you pair that with the belief that adaptation is possible, you create a loop that leads to growth. There's a crucial difference between distress and eustress. Distress overwhelms and impairs function. Eustress is productive stress, the kind that pushes you to improve. What separates them isn't always the objective difficulty of the situation, it's how you interpret it. And that interpretation changes the neurochemical cocktail flowing through your brain and body. Cortisol, often viewed negatively, is essential in small, well-regulated amounts. It mobilizes energy and increases alertness, but chronic elevation, paired with a sense of helplessness, leads to anxiety, brain fog, and physical wear. The key isn't to eliminate stress, it's to build stress resilience, the ability to experience stress without being owned by it. And that starts with perception. Your belief in your capacity to adapt isn't naive optimism. It has physiological correlates. Studies show that individuals who believe stress is enhancing rather than harmful experience fewer negative health outcomes and perform better under pressure. Their brains literally process the same stress signals differently. Another factor to consider is the role of deliberate discomfort in expanding your capacity. Voluntarily doing hard things, whether that's intense exercise, cold exposure, deep focus work, or confronting difficult emotions, trains your system to tolerate and even grow from adversity. The brain records these experiences and becomes more efficient at handling future challenges. But here's the twist. Adaptation doesn't happen during the challenge itself, it happens afterward. You stress the system, and then during sleep, rest, and reflection, the brain rewires. That's why recovery and sleep aren't just luxuries, they're part of the growth equation. So, by reminding yourself in the morning that you're built to adapt, you're setting the tone not just for the moment, but for an ongoing cycle of growth and recovery. There's also the concept of interoception, your brain's awareness of the internal signals of your body. By developing a better relationship with these signals, learning to observe your heart rate, your breath, your muscle tension, you increase your ability to self-regulate. And that starts with noticing, then interpreting those sensations not as threats, but as signals that you are engaged. All of this means that when you say to yourself, "I can handle challenge," you're not pretending life will be easy. You're telling your nervous system the truth. that you have the tools, the biology, and the capacity to navigate what comes. This shift in mindset, practiced daily, creates real changes in brain function over time. The circuits involved in self-regulation, goal pursuit, and emotional balance become stronger and more coordinated. So as you start your day, don't aim for comfort or ease, aim for engagement. Invite stress the right kind and meet it with the awareness that your body is designed to grow from it. That belief is more than motivational. It's a neurological switch that turns adversity into adaptation. And the good news is, the more you practice this, the easier it becomes. Because like any skill, resilience is trainable, and your morning mind, it is where the training begins. Human behavior is not driven by willpower alone. In fact, relying solely on motivation is one of the most unreliable ways to create consistency or progress. Instead, what truly drives sustained effort is momentum, the internal sense that you're moving forward, gaining ground, and building towards something. And the most reliable way to create momentum is by recognizing and building on small wins. From a neuroscience perspective, every small action, waking up on time, making your bed, exercising, completing a task, or even resisting distraction, is an opportunity to engage your brain's reward circuitry. When you complete a meaningful task, your brain releases dopamine, a neuromodulator that doesn't just make you feel good. It enhances your motivation, attention, and ability to persist. Dopamine is often misunderstood. It's not simply a pleasure chemical. It's a molecule that signals progress toward a goal. When you perceive that you're making progress even in a small way, dopamine levels rise. That increase tells your brain, this is working, do more of this. It's your internal system of encouragement and drive. The problem is that most people wait for big accomplishments to feel successful. They set distant, often abstract goals, get in shape, write a book, start a business, and then spend weeks or months feeling like they're failing because the end result hasn't arrived. But the brain doesn't function well under delayed reward with no feedback. Without dopamine, motivation stalls. This is where the strategy of acknowledging small wins becomes essential. Let's say you wake up and hydrate. That's a win. You resisted the urge to scroll your phone and instead went outside for sunlight exposure. That's another. You focused on a task for 25 minutes without breaking concentration. Another win. Each of these might seem insignificant on their own, but together they create a neurochemical chain reaction. You begin to feel capable, focused, and motivated not because the task was exciting, but because your brain registered success. This is sometimes referred to in psychology as the progress principle. The idea that the single most powerful motivator in daily work and life is the experience of making progress. Even a small step forward can have a disproportionately large effect on motivation and outlook. The key is to make progress visible to the brain. This can be done through self-talk, journaling, habit tracking, or simply by mentally registering that you completed something. When you do this, you're reinforcing what's called the salience network, the brain regions that determine what matters and deserves your attention. You're essentially teaching your brain, this kind of behavior is worth repeating. There's also a concept in behavioral neuroscience called chunking, the process of breaking large tasks into smaller, manageable parts. This isn't just about productivity. Chunking aligns with how the brain sequences motor actions, thoughts, and plans. By dividing a big goal into smaller steps, you create multiple opportunities for dopamine release. Each completed chunk becomes a source of internal reinforcement. Importantly, these small wins should be framed as identity statements. For example, when you complete a focused writing session, rather than saying, "I did some writing," say to yourself, "I'm becoming someone who shows up consistently to write." This subtle shift taps into the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for long-term planning and self-concept. You're not just logging actions, you're reshaping your identity, which has long-term implications for behavior and motivation. This approach also reduces the all or nothing thinking that derails progress. Many people sabotage themselves with binary thinking: either they had a perfect day or they failed. But the brain doesn't require perfection to grow. It requires repetition and reinforcement. Small wins, consistently acknowledged, build the mental and physiological scaffolding for long-term success. Momentum is also self-reinforcing. Once you have a few wins, you're more likely to take the next action. Your focus sharpens, your energy improves, even your posture and voice tone change as confidence builds. These physical changes feed back into your mental state through a process called embodied cognition, the idea that your body cues your brain just as much as your thoughts do. Winning, even in small ways, primes you to win again. This doesn't mean you need to celebrate every minor action like it's a major achievement. Instead, the goal is to recognize effort and completion, to allow your brain to register that progress is happening. Over time, this trains your nervous system to seek and enjoy effort rather than merely tolerate it. And when you encounter setbacks, which are inevitable, this small win mindset becomes a safety net. If your day goes off course, instead of giving up, you can reset and look for the next win. That might be drinking water, taking a walk, or sitting in stillness for 60 seconds. These aren't just mood boosters, they're signals to your brain: I'm still moving forward. Ultimately, what transforms a day, a week, or a life is not the occasional burst of heroic effort, but the quiet, repeated decision to act and to recognize that action. When you train your mind to value small wins, you create an internal engine of progress that becomes hard to stop. Most people assume they see the world as it is, but in truth, you see the world through the lens of how you feel internally. This is not a poetic metaphor, it's a biological reality. Your internal state, your level of alertness, calm, fatigue, stress, or well-being heavily shapes how you perceive people, tasks, opportunities, and even yourself. This process is governed by a system called interoception, your brain's ability to sense and interpret signals from within your body. Heart rate, breathing, hunger, muscle tension, and hormonal shifts, all of these send continuous updates to the brain about your physiological condition. And the brain, in turn, uses that information to construct your emotional and cognitive experience of the world. In other words, when you're tired, anxious, or underfueled, your brain isn't just processing that as a body issue. It interprets external stimuli differently. A neutral face might look hostile. A manageable task might feel overwhelming. A mild inconvenience might trigger frustration. Your brain doesn't always distinguish between a threat in your environment and a threat from within. It simply responds to the input. This explains why the same situation, a work email, a conversation, a workout, a piece of feedback, can feel completely different depending on whether you slept well, ate well, or took time to reset. The external world hasn't changed. You have, and your internal state is quietly coloring everything you experience. This is why managing your internal state is not optional, it's foundational. If you want to have clarity, emotional balance, good judgment, or effective communication, you need to tune the internal instrument through which all of that flows, your nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system, which regulates bodily functions without conscious control, has two branches: sympathetic, which mobilizes energy and alertness, and parasympathetic, which promotes rest, digestion, and recovery. These systems are always in dynamic balance. But when you wake up stressed, stay indoors, skip meals, or overload your schedule without breaks, the balance tilts toward chronic sympathetic activation. You remain in a low-grade fight or flight state, edgy, impatient, fatigued, and reactive. From this state, your perception narrows. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, empathy, and foresight, becomes less active. Meanwhile, subcortical structures like the amygdala become more dominant. You start scanning for problems. You interpret uncertainty as threat. This isn't personality, it's physiology, and it can become your default unless you learn how to intervene and reset. Fortunately, the nervous system is not fixed. You can shift your internal state by engaging in specific behaviors that signal to your body and brain that safety and control are present. For instance, deep, Slow exhalations activate the vagus nerve, which enhances parasympathetic tone. This is why breathwork is so effective at calming anxiety. It's not mystical, it's mechanical. Similarly, light exposure early in the day helps regulate your circadian rhythm and increases levels of cortisol at the appropriate time, giving you energy and alertness without overstimulation. Movement, even just 5-10 minutes of walking, increases blood flow to the brain and rebalances neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, improving both mood and focus. Nutrition also plays a major role. Low blood sugar and dehydration are two of the most overlooked drivers of irritability, fatigue, and clouded thinking. When your internal state is dysregulated, a difficult conversation feels impossible. A creative task feels draining. A neutral comment feels like criticism. But stabilize your physiology and those same situations are manageable, even energizing. Another powerful reset tool is visual focus. When you're stressed, your vision narrows literally, your pupils dilate, and your field of view becomes tunnel-like. This is part of the survival response. But when you deliberately widen your gaze looking at the horizon, stepping outside, or simply relaxing your eyes, you shift your brain into a more relaxed, broad state. This expands perception and creates a sense of mental space. What's important to understand is that internal state isn't just about how you feel. It's about how you interpret reality. When you take time in the morning and throughout the day to influence that state, you're not being indulgent. You're optimizing the filter through which you experience everything else. This is why grounding yourself with intentional behaviors first thing in the morning matters so much. Before you dive into work, social media, or news, take a moment to stabilize the system. Hydrate, move, get light in your eyes, breathe deeply. Even 3-5 minutes of intentional activity can change your internal chemistry. And with that shift comes a different day, not because the world changed, but because you did. Once you begin observing your internal state regularly, you also gain the power of response over reaction. You notice when you're on edge, and instead of lashing out or withdrawing, you pause, you assess. You use the tools breath, posture, movement, light to shift gears. That single moment of awareness can prevent a spiral and instead build resilience. Over time, you also begin to trust yourself more. You no longer feel controlled by mood or circumstance. You learn how to create the conditions for clarity and calm, and with that comes better thinking, better relationships, and better results. So the next time something feels off, ask, is this really about the situation or is it my internal state? That question alone brings awareness. And awareness, paired with action, transforms perception and your day. In a world saturated with noise, distraction, and constant demands for your time, one of the most valuable assets you possess is your attention. But attention isn't just a resource you use, it's a skill you can train, and a tool that shapes how your brain develops and how you experience reality. From a neuroscience perspective, attention is the mechanism by which the brain selects what information to process deeply and what to filter out. Every second, your nervous system is bombarded with sensory data, sounds, sights, internal signals, thoughts, and emotions, but your brain can't process all of it equally. Instead, it uses attention as a spotlight, illuminating certain aspects of your experience while leaving others in the dark. What you shine that spotlight on consistently literally determines the structure and function of your brain. This is known as experience-dependent plasticity. Neural circuits that are used frequently get stronger, while those that are neglected weaken. So, if you habitually focus on distractions, urgency, or negativity, you're not just having scattered thoughts, you're training your brain to be scattered, reactive, and stressed. Conversely, if you focus intentionally on deep work, goals, gratitude, or problem solving, you're reinforcing the neural pathways that support calm, clarity, and action. Most people don't lose their attention, they give it away. They wake up and immediately begin reacting to emails, notifications, headlines, messages. This puts them in a receptive state their brain isn't creating, it's reacting to what's being thrown at it. In this state, the prefrontal cortex responsible for planning, decision making, and focus is constantly being interrupted. Over time, this leads to fatigue, mental fog, and a diminished ability to complete even simple tasks. But it doesn't have to be this way. Like a muscle, attention can be strengthened, and one of the most effective times to train it is first thing in the morning, when your brain is highly plastic and sensitive to cues. What you do in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking creates a template for how your brain will operate the rest of the day. If you check your phone, rush through your routine, and multitask, you prime your mind for fractured thinking. But if you engage in even a few minutes of single, task-focused breathwork, writing, reading, planning, you signal to your brain, this is how we operate today. This is why mindfulness and meditation are so frequently recommended not for their philosophy, but for their neural impact. Even 5 minutes of focused breathing or stillness increases activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, a brain area involved in self-regulation and selective attention. Over time, this changes the way your brain processes distraction not by removing it, but by giving you more control over what you respond to and what you ignore. But attention training doesn't only happen in meditation. It happens anytime you resist the pull of the easy path and choose to stay with something challenging: writing, solving, thinking, listening. That moment of resistance and your choice to lean into focus is like a mental rep at the gym. The discomfort is the training. Your dopaminergic system is also involved here. Every time you complete a focused task without distraction, your brain gets a small pulse of dopamine. This feels satisfying, and your brain begins to associate deep work with reward. This is how you begin to enjoy focus, not just tolerate it. But the opposite is also true. If you constantly interrupt yourself with novelty scrolling, switching tabs, checking messages, your dopamine system becomes desensitized, requiring more and more stimulation to feel satisfied. This creates a cycle of impatience, boredom, and restlessness. The solution isn't to eliminate all distraction. That's impossible. The solution is to build your capacity for sustained focus, just a little at a time. This could mean doing one task with full attention for 10 minutes, then 20, then 40. It could mean turning off notifications during work blocks. It could mean simply noticing when your attention drifts and gently bringing it back. Attention also influences emotional regulation. When you're able to direct your focus, you're less likely to be overwhelmed by anxiety or stress. Instead of getting swept up in thought loops, you can ground yourself in something tangible: breath, movement, a task. This is because focused attention recruits networks in the brain that inhibit excessive emotional reactivity, particularly from the amygdala and limbic system. In other words, focus creates calm. Another overlooked aspect of attention is what you attend to within your own mind. Are you focusing on what's going wrong, what you can't control, what others think? Or are you focusing on solutions, next steps, and growth? This isn't about ignoring reality, it's about choosing which aspects of reality to emphasize. Because whatever you focus on grows stronger in your perception, in your emotion, and in your brain. Training your attention doesn't require hours of silence or extreme discipline. It starts with small decisions: to pause, to breathe, to focus, to be deliberate. Over time, those decisions rewire your brain's default mode. You become someone who creates clarity instead of waiting for it, who shapes thought rather than being shaped by it. In a distracted world, focused attention isn't just useful, it's a form of self-leadership. It's how you steer your mind, your day, and ultimately your life, and the more you practice, the more powerful it becomes.